This is an event hosted by the Nordic banking associations because there's a lot of interest in Nordic countries in this, and also a lot of support, I'm going to say, even though we have our differences on some issues around taxonomy, forestry. We'll park that for a minute. I'm going to say that the financial sector in the Nordic countries has been vocal about its support for the idea of taxonomy in the past. So that's good. But of course, it's not been a simple journey. So the purpose of today is to ask your views, get your views, and on where we are and where we're going. I appreciate there's a vote coming up on the CDA, the Complementary Delegated Act, coming forward. Feel free to comment. I'm going to ask Sirpa to begin with first, but just for the listeners, we have the line. Sirpa Pitikainen is a member of the European People's Party. She's one of the longest serving members of the European Parliament. She's seen everything. She knows where all the bodies are buried, is the way I'd put it. But more to the point, she's been involved in environmental action, environmental proposals, and how we improve our environmental situation, our ability to address the challenges of Europe, ever since she's been in Parliament. She's been a real pioneer, a leader in this particular space. And we have a lot to thank you for, Sirpa, in terms of past activities. She's also been the rapporteur for the taxonomy regulation when it came through. And for those of you who don't know what a rapporteur is, it means the MEP who's reporting on the European Commission proposal for legislation, dealing with it. And I'm sure Paul and Sirpa will give us more details in a minute. Paul Tang from the Socialist and Democratic Party, S&D Party from the Netherlands, has been the rapporteur for the Green Bond Standard and also involved in the disclosure rapporteur for the disclosure standard, and so on and so on and so on. Both of them been very visible in issues around taxonomy, around sustainable finance regulation. That's the background. Sirpa, tell us your view on where we are now, what we've achieved, what the issues are, and then maybe take us to where we're going.
Well, thank you, and Jean, thank you for your very kind words. And I'll try to sort of give this kind of a helicopter view of the landscape where we are in sustainable finance. Firstly, sustainability is two ends. The another end is what is risky, what is sunk investment, what are investments like coal or peat that actually worsen the climate change, worsen the biodiversity and other factors. This is work that is done quite a lot on the Financial Stability Board. It's done by the ECB and quite a number of institutions. And its linkage to taxonomy is that there is the mention of a do no significant harm principle. That means that anything that you can label green or sustainable, it can't do significant harm. You can't produce solar panels with child labor and call them green, or you can't sort of construct something out of wood and burn it and then cause biodiversity loss significantly. Palm oil is a good example of that.
Sirpa, this is a really important point. I now need to disclose a do no significant harm issue. I need to ask whether we can record this event from you and Paul to ensure I avoid this. And then alert everyone online that this will be recorded. It'll be sent to participants, and people can also ask questions in the Q&A button of the bottom, just so I don't do any harm by not disclosing. Back to you.
Thank you. And that was clearly do no significant harm principle. So then what was important to Parliament is that the green and grey, or starting from black, it's 50 shades of green and grey. It's not a dichotomy. You have quite clearly the harmful activities. And then on the other hand, you have that what is to be called green and sustainable. And it should be sustainable with all these indicators, at least in some level. And in between, we are going to always have media, quite a number of health technologies, consultancy, whatever other businesses that actually you can't say that they are harmful for the environment, but actually you can't say that this is a detrimental positive choice like a solar panel. by self reading one newspaper instead of another one. And then I'll get back on how we sort of deal with this in betweens. But okay, this is to understand that the taxonomy refers to the best in class. It is the golden standard. And this is said clearly in the first level of regulation, substantially better than industry average, science based, based on indicators, and really do no significant harm. And this is sort of a sustainability. And the science-based and indicators is important because, for example, in accounting standards, the reliability for investors, be it institutional or retail investors, it's crucial. What you call green can't be only my and your opinion, and then we'll just outvote Paul in a case that we would have a difference of an opinion. It needs to be measurable. It needs to be broadly accepted. And this is the basis what very strongly EU has been advocating to IFRS, that it is about to create that kind of a sustainability regulation and rule book for company accounting. Okay. Then we got to the point that this first level of regulation was accepted, and this is the basis how this disclosure regulation is to be implemented. That tells what is green and what is bad in a way, where the Paul was the leading person, and I had the honor to be a co-negotiator from my political party there, and Paul was then again with the taxonomy, so we know pretty intimately about what all is going on in sustainable finance. And we had the first set of delegated acts, and this is climate. Now we have to remember we are only talking about climate. A huge debate about the forest coming from Finland. Can't be very proud of that, that you actually needed to pressurize the level of ambition to the floor, so to the point you can't fall anymore. And that was the mistake in many people's minds, that, okay, when this taxonomy should be understood as sort of an organic label. Other potatoes are very good and I eat them, and they are totally edible. But you just can't label them organic if they are not, because that just sort of creates confusion. And this was what we did slightly with the forest and bioenergy already on the first slot. But there were a lot of good, and I'm very happy with the constructions and buildings and energy and the other array. It is starting point. Then we came to the very disputed area of nuclear and gas that we actually are dealing next week in plenary vote. And there, the ambitions of member states won over the Commission. And they had different kind of aspirations. I want to be my potatoes, and not only potatoes, but cabbage to be labeled green, because that ensures better investments. And actually, this does not happen, because if none of the private investors are labeling gas or nuclear green, they are not going to start labeling it because EU does it. So you do not get more money because of this sort of incentive in quotes, but you hurt the creditability of taxonomy and the first level of regulation. And I know that there are some partners willing to take the Commission to the court if the delegated act passes. And the same in the nuclear. You might like it or not, but if you would have set the bar high on this modular small scale reusing the fuel types of fusion, yes, you can claim it's green, it's the industry, better than industrial. But labeling old Russian nuclear, if they have base treatment plants by 2040 green, come on, how can it be even worse anymore? So this is really glued to the floor. And this is my worry, that this actually harms not the market so much, but it is going to harm the creditability of the taxonomy on the eyes of the investors, and our creditability as a negotiation partner when we are creating the IFR standards. Okay, and I'll conclude here. But then when looking forward, I really would like to continue the discussion with you, and I would keep your eyes closed to this IFRS process and then the next steps of the taxonomy.
We'll come back to that. But let's come back to that in that case.
Biodiversity
Yeah.
criteria coming up this autumn, or it might be delayed. Then we are going to have still during this election period the circular economy. The biodiversity is going to be difficult. Then circular economy and pollution and waters. So there's quite a lot of, because now we are only dealing with the first slot, the climate, and it's proven out to be so difficult. So let's see how it goes further. And then there's the demand by the parliament, actually commission promised that during this election period to come up with the impact assessment and an idea of the social taxonomy, because of course if we have ESG, the qualifications would need to be in the same regulation and not the separate.
Thank you, Sirpa. For our listeners, the idea beyond that taxonomy is a kind of shopping list for the future. Understanding how it works requires you to have a sense of what that future needs to look like. We, of course, have a very clear challenge when it comes to climate change. And that challenge has been painted most vividly for us in the reports of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change earlier this year, where they're saying unless we get emissions down by 50% by 2030, by 2030, 7.5 years away, we don't have much of a future. We have a catastrophic future ahead of us. And then further reductions required 2050. So they're saying really, we need to embrace this idea, which we've failed to for the last 30 years. We've been listening to the scientists. They've been telling us this pretty consistently now for the last 30 years, and have been saying, oh, that sounds really hard. What about we just do this? Will that be okay? And that's effectively what we've done. And it hasn't been okay. Emissions have gone up when they should have gone down. So that's the background. The taxonomy tries, from a climate perspective, to paint what counts as material to achieving the transition. There's a taxonomy in place. It came into force on the 1st of January this year. That was the work that Sirpa did last year, being rapporteur for that particular legislation. Now there's a complementary delegated act, an adjustment that the Commission has put forward to the Parliament, which is being managed and has just come out of committee recently. I'll ask Paul to tell us what happened there, which proposes, as Sirpa was saying, nuclear in a particular way and certain gas investments included. The gas stuff is especially controversial in the context of the invasion of the Ukraine, where Europe is now saying, oh, we made a terrible mistake becoming dependent on Russian gas over the last 30 years. We now have a geopolitical problem, not to mention a climate problem. So the symbolism is difficult at least, but also it's not consistent with science. And the EU platform, I think, made that very clear in its response to the draft CDA in January. But nevertheless, the Commission's proceeded. Frankly, I think you're right, sir, but the Commission's been forced by member states to do this. And there's an issue about what member states are thinking. And also, this was done last year. Why are they still thinking that this year? I keep thinking maybe they'll wake up and withdraw it any moment. But I don't know, Paul, I guess there's a question for you. Where are we at? What's happening at the CDA? And what's the bigger picture look like to you?
Yeah, sorry, I need to find the right button. I hope you can hear me well, and thank you, Sean, for this introduction. I also liked the word in your introduction, it's a journey. So we're on our way. And I would, I myself use the word the expression work in progress quite often. Also, in relation to the financial sector, yesterday, for example, I had 2 discussions on the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. This is what Sirpa and I were able to negotiate right before in the end of the last mandate. It was April 2019. And now I have discussions with the people that have to put this legislation into practice. And I'm fascinated to learn what works and what doesn't work, right? Broadly, you could say there are many, I learned from example yesterday, there are 4.2 trillion of assets now under category 8 or 9 and SFDR. But we all see there the problem that it's used not just as a tool for transparency, but rather as a benchmark. If I'm an Article 8 product, and this invokes the fear of greenwashing. So we're having this discussion, and I point this out because there's an important, I still think what you see here is a very interesting and potentially promising interaction between, let's say, the lawmakers in Brussels and the financial market participants, right? It's not just, it's the interaction between the two, which I find fascinating, because sometimes the lawmakers are being pushed by the financial sector to go forward. And one way to do it is at least have these discussions and also listen to each other. And so generally what we try to do is well, if I would say it in my, I'm from the Socialist and Democrat side, so if I would put in my own political term, I think Milton Friedman has already died, but we're still trying to bury him, right? That's how I would say it. So it's not just profits. Corporates are not a profit machine. It's about people and planet, the impact you have on that. And this is work in progress. This is systemic change, and you can't just do this overnight.
You know, Paul, I'm just going to say you've touched the real button with me there, because of course, in working with investors globally, which is our primary stakeholder base, this change is live, that people understand now the relationship between a society that can enable wealth and profits and the individual actions of companies, which really means capital with purpose is now become mainstream. And in a way, we're still catching up, aren't we, in terms of a regulatory environment and our corporate world. But from a capital perspective, that's a really good point you raise.
Yeah, and of course, but let's face it, it is work in progress, because on the one hand, I see very, like I said, I'm sometimes being pushed by financial market participants, for example, institutional investors, or by your initiative that shows the way forward. And these are the front runners. But there are also laggards in the financial markets. I still see that banks finance oil exploration, where I don't think that's in line with Paris. So there you are. And this is how I see the role of legislation, not always leading the way, but making sure that the laggards catch up to the front runners. Right. So in that sense, it's an interesting interaction between, and for me, for example, so I mentioned sustainable finance disclosure regulation, but for me, it's in the end, it should be accountability. That is sometimes done by rule-based, but it can also be principle-based. So what I want is to have corporates, the investee companies, and the investor being accountable for the impact investment and activities have, not just on profit, but on people and planet. And sometimes, now we have come a long way since 2018 when Sirpa and I started to work on that, but we're still building, right? It's not something that is finished yet. And it cannot be, like I said, cannot be done overnight. So there are still bits and pieces missing. And by the way, we need to learn along the way what can be done better. For example, when we started on the disclosure regulation, it was just for investors. We knew at that point, of course, well, there would need to be disclosure for the investee companies. Well, 2 weeks ago, we have reached an agreement on the CSRD, so that part is now finished. But it just shows how much it's work in progress. We need, so this is the overall setting, but I would like to move forward in 5 years' time that it's people, it's profit, people, and planet, and it is a huge change, but I firmly believe in it. Of course, when you're on a journey and when you're a work in progress, you sometimes have accidents, right? And one of the accidents is, of course, fossil gas and nuclear in the taxonomy. You could also say this was an accident that was sort of built in. What you see now is the taxonomy is defining the green corner. And everyone wants to be in that green corner. So member states, France in particular, started to push and say, we want to be in that green corner too. We think nuclear is green because we have all this. So maybe it was an accident waiting to happen. We try to correct the accidents. In the European Parliament, we have next week the vote. We had a vote in the two main committees, Econ and Envy. We won that vote, but it's going to be a tight vote. Also because what we need in Parliament to stop it is what is called an absolute majority. So we need 353 votes to support the objection and against the delegated acts. Now, it's going to be tight. So if you're out there and you're willing to stop it, please mail your local MEP, because next week we can stop it and we can correct correct this accident.
We've had some interesting developments this week, haven't we? I mean, I take your point that this is, in fact, the fact that this argument's going on is a win for the taxonomy, because as you say, everyone now wants to be in the green corner and they're arguing about being in. So that's we've already won. But I know this week there was a minister, was a letter to MEPs from a Ukrainian, I'm not sure it was a minister or ambassador, saying this is supporting Putin if we put through the CDA. Yeah. Is that right?
Well, that's how I see it, at least. It will increase because the delegated act is about gas-powered plants. It's, for example, not on liquid gas. So it will only increase our dependency on Russia, and the same goes for nuclear. So yeah, I think sometimes some people say it's power to Putin or it's a gift to Putin. I read this morning, and I broadly agree. I don't think the Commission will withdraw it because they were supported by the two most important member states when they draw up the delegated acts. It was cooked up in Paris and in Berlin, I'm afraid. But it's well, we hope to correct the situation, but it's going to be a tight vote in all honesty. At the same time, I'm also pointing out that we're in the green corner, and that led to this accident. So what I very much want to see with the taxonomy is expanded. It's like Sirpa said, it's about 50 shades of green. And it's more about, and what we need more now in the taxonomy, but more generally in the sustainable finance, is to focus on the transition, because this is the most important part of sustainable finance, making sure that companies, corporates, investors make the transition towards sustainability. And that would sort of also take us away the pressure to be green. Now you want to become green. That's the essential part now. And this we also see now in sustainable finance, which I think is a very good development. There's much more emphasis on transition plans. The ECB asked this from banks already. It's now in the CSRD, which is still called Non-Financial Reporting Directive, which is of course the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. I have put it forward in the green bonds, the proposal for the green bond standard, because I think this is what it should be about. It's one thing
just for our listeners, Paul, when we're talking transition, we're talking about corporate strategies, like you could be a high carbon company, but you're going to become low carbon with requisite ambition in the Paris Agreement, right? We got that?
Yeah.
Have I got that?
And of course, and this is not. And this
sorry, Sirpa, did you want to comment? You put your hand up. I'm worried that we're missing Sirpa.
Yeah.
No noise.
You need to unmute Sirpa.
She's still not there.
Sirpa, you need to unmute.
The problems with the Zoom age.
Let's go first and conclude his sentence, and then I can just comment on this transition.
So this is a really critical concept, Paul. Really critical.
I think it's, and let's face it, I'm not sure that Sirpa and I thought of this in 2018, right? It was not a blueprint. We started working. Mm-hmm. And like I said, along the way, you discover, okay, but this is a crucial element and it's not going to be an easy exercise. This is the sense I want to do, because you need to look ahead. And the future is uncertain, but at the same time, even though it's difficult, doesn't mean it's impossible, because we know what a credible investment or corporate strategy is. For example, I've witnessed the discussion on Shell, the oil company. I come from the Netherlands, so it used to be Dutch Shell, right? But their institutional investors have said, okay, we no longer want to invest in Shell and engage with Shell because we don't think they have a credible transition strategy. And I think that's a very relevant discussion to have, and we should have more often. And this of course applies to the very large corporates. I think also about the smaller enterprises that we have out there that still have to start a transition, and it should be about transition. it's all about transition.
If I may continue, the point is that the line what has been chosen together with the council in the first level of a regulation is that you can classify certain technologies as transitional. That came from the whole concept from the council, but you can't classify companies. And then if you think that they are transitional technology, it's a bit, I get it. It's a bit like, hybrid car. It's better than diesel, but actually there's a long way to go that it is totally hydrogen or it is a totally solar car that we do have in the markets. And then if you start sort of picking in all of the sectors, what is transitional? We just come up with these issues like now with the gas. Can you call using gas in central heating with pipelines? Come on, it is CO2 as transitional. Can you use it up to 2030 and then to close the pipelines or imagine that you have the hydrogen? I really can't see it as transitional. But then again, we do have this enormous amount of need for transitional funding and companies. And Paul, when you mentioned the Shell, may I pick it up? Even the Shell could be a transitional company if it would have ambitious plan how it is climate neutral or genuinely climate neutral by 2030. It would have audited third-party reports what it is done doing year by year, and it would be disinvesting out of fossils and reinvesting to solar or whatever hydrogen or whatever technologies. And there again, not to the blue hydrogen, sort of just turning the fossils to another form. So, and then I could sort of envisage, we call it a transitional company, and hopefully then after 8 years, it could get this kind of a full breed green sustainable label. And that would facilitate the companies to change. And this is what I've been trying to talk to Mary McGuinness, to the commissioner, that cannot we have that regulation? And the commission is extremely hesitant and saying, no, it doesn't fit the picture and so on. So probably we in the parliament should be doing something with that at some point.
I mean, to explain to our listeners, boundaries really count. If Volkswagen was going to build a new diesel plant outside of Wolfsburg, it might reduce emissions 15% compared to current diesel fleets with the technology advantages. Sounds good. What's not to like? 15% reduction in emissions. But we know that to achieve our climate targets, we've got to do a lot better than 15%. We need to get 50%, 60%, 80% reduction in emissions in the car fleet. So we need them to go electric and to bypass more efficient fossil fuels, and an understanding of the necessary ambition to achieve a target set in that sector is critical. And we have used the taxonomy to set very clear guide rails doing that. And by the way, everyone, luckily Volkswagen is actually building an electric plant. So they're doing well, which means they could be a candidate to become a transition company if they put out a plan that we could all assess and judge. But someone's asked in the panels about, since it's going to take a long time to get to 100% renewable energy, hopefully not that long. IEA is talking about 2035. Agora Energy Vendor is talking about 2035 at the moment. It's a stretch, yes, but can we build more nuclear? The IEA, the International Energy Agency, said last year in its net zero report, there can be no new fossil fuel infrastructure if we are to meet a 1.5 degree trajectory. Very clear modeling, very clear report. Sweating existing infrastructure, getting gas supplies from Qatar into Germany in the short term to make sure we can keep warming houses next. That's one thing. Putting in new infrastructure is very difficult and we can't meet our target. So these are the things that taxonomy has flashed out, these discussions. And as Paul says, the discussion now is, well, okay, can I still be green then? And we need to make sure that's a science-based conversation. It's not the opinion of NGOs like ours. It's not the opinion of MEPs like Paul and Serpa, or do they have to navigate the legislation? It's what the climate scientists tell us that we need to now listen to. And that's the interesting part. But this transition discussion, Paul, is very rich, isn't it, in terms of how we go. what's your response to the hesitancy on the part of the Commission around transition? Do you think there's room to move? For example, guidance around the application of the existing taxonomy, could that help us tease out the whole transitions idea more, or do we really need more legislation in this? What's your hunch?
I would like to think it can be done relatively easily, that we already have the elements in place to come to better foster the transition investment. I've been looking at that as part of the green bond standard, to look at the idea of a transition bond, for example. But it was also, and I discovered it was relatively easy to do, and that it was reinforced by the advice from the Sustainable Finance Platform that shows that you can have, we now have green, you want to have an intermediate category, you could call it amber, or you call it, and have a red category, and this is what they flagged. And so we can already use the current framework with two criteria, this, the sustainability, the substantial contribution on the one hand, and the do not significant harm criteria on the other hand. So we have already it in place to define what a transition is. The first step in the transition is going, say, from red to the intermediate category to amber to satisfy the do not significant harm criteria. And the second step would be to have a substantial contribution. If I sort of try to summarize the Sustainable Finance Platform in one sentence. Now, this concept is very appealing because that means that we make use of the current taxonomy. We don't need to build, like I said, the element is in place. We now need to learn to work with it. Of course, when it comes to the credibility of our 28 years away from 250, not an easy, but it's a good and fair discussion that we need to have. So what is then, according with the taxonomy in hand, what is a credible strategy to move towards sustainability? And I'm looking forward to that discussion. I think that's what we need.
I guess that begs the question of the current platform. I mean, I can't comment formally because I'm a member of the platform, but what's your reading of the likely progress on the new crop of reports, such as the one you've mentioned and the social report and so on, in terms of parliamentary action? I mean, are you getting positive signals? And Sirpa, you've been speaking to the commissioner, yeah, no, I know. Do you think there's going to be progress?
Shall I try? Because I was also trying to push the commissioner. So Sirpa and I didn't know this. I could have known that Sirpa was doing the same, of course. And I would like to think for the commissioner, the transition is a very interesting topic, political topic that she could raise, because this applies to most of our activity, to most of our companies. Yet you can also sense that the discussion on the delegated act in the taxonomy on fossil gas and nuclear has left scars with the Commission. So the Commission is not always as progressive as Parliament, I would like to think, but certainly not now. So this is where that's why we need to have this push, and like this push, like Sirpa and I try to push, it's also for the financial sector in this case to push, right? So it's let's make it a joint project. And if you also think that there should be focus on transition, please signal this to the Commission, because I think that it should be on the table. But I would very much like to see that after we have next week the vote on the delegated act on taxonomy, it's going to be in a sense an ugly vote because it's a divisive topic, right? So it will be split half, so roughly. That's why it's too close to call it this time. So what we need again is to have to keep the momentum in a sustainable finance strategy, to have items on the agenda that unite us and say, this is a way forward. So this is what I also try to push with the Commission. It's now time to come up with an agenda, and not just for 5 years from now, but also now in the coming 2 years. We need new items on the agenda that unite us.
It's such a good point, Paul, particularly in the context of this division. Sirpa.
Yes, I would like to continue on this. There are many elements. First element is, of course, the role of the platform that we fought very, very hard in the Parliament, that it really would be this kind of an expert group. not take sort of a lobby group put together that you have a Nordics and West and trade unions and business Europes and nuclear and farmers and whatever represented. Because there certainly it's too much to ask to have a objective or science-based criteria. And the result was pretty good, as we can see from the proposals. And the reason to have this kind of a sort of a bit of isolated platform is necessary, and I think it was proven because the platform's reaction to this gas and nuclear delegated act was really harsh, and in the case it would have been accepted, the figures for gas would have been totally different, and now it is even growing closer up to the limit to do no significant harm. That is actually ridiculous. And my fear is, and this is sort of the guardian role of the parliament, to take care that the next platform is going to be a genuine platform, not this kind of a collection of in quotes balanced collection of national and industry interests, because then you are certain to get a twisted result. And it is too much to ask to have the objective, to have the knowledge, or it is a bit the same that I would ask you, Jean, or myself. Please do give an objective salary number for yourself.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, yeah. That is sort of the description of a self-interest and how hard it is, even though you would be working in the organization to set that aside. Well, anyway, that is one part. Then the second part, and there the Paul was referring already, is that as difficult and big the taxonomy is, the Commission should move forward with that. It should entail the social taxonomy. Otherwise, we are waiting too long, and we have these due diligence regulations and others, and this is going to create that kind of unbalance in how you make the criteria. Please keep adequate ambition level of the biodiversity. The Commission is again a bit hesitant, quite hesitant about that. But then if you just sort of let the taxonomy slide the downslope when you started, then it is better to kill the beast, so to say. It's a bit Sophie's choice. You know, the film of Walking Dead, where the mothers and fathers wonder what to do with the kids that have turned out to be a Walking Deads. You don't want to have them wandering like that all around the place, but otherwise, it's just you don't have the guts to kill them. And sometimes I feel that we feel a bit like this in the parliament about having a good intention and dear child, and then you really don't want it to be turned out to be a monster.
Well,
But then again,
I have to ask you a question there, Sep, I'm afraid, because whilst I'm rather vested in this, I still think this is a child worth keeping. We do have criticism. We've got banks and corporations and saying, hey, this has become too complicated. It's become too, while the investment industry is saying, yes, right direction, usability has become a bit of an issue. Do you get
yes,
that kind of feedback?
Rightly.
Right.
And this was something we from the parliament tried to push for the Commission, and they started with the dichotomy. And we sort of expanded the scope and added the do no significant harm. But then again, in the longer run, and this is where the IFRS is going, and I have had quite a number of budget proposals not gone through, that we should set this kind of a data space or calculation methodology where this kind of a life cycle analysis, PEF, that is how Commission calls it, can be calculated because textiles 4% you produce in Europe. So basically you would need to really look the whole production chain and purchasing chain. And there you need to have the models, how you calculate CO2 emissions, the biodiversity impact, and so on. And actually in the future, the taxonomy should be giving those models, and we should have European data space and a global IFRS linked data space where then you could find the proxies. Okay, this is a bit like in IFRS. This is the quote how to calculate the return on investment. You just can't sort of take it out of your hat. And then this is how you calculate CO2 footprint over the production chain, could be one model. And then, of course, then you need the data, approximately what is in mining, the CO2 emissions to the mining of ore or mining of aluminium or whatever. And with that data, then the companies are actually much better to present what is the actual footprint and handprint. And it is after that easier for investors to choose and really look that this is better or worse. Sorry for using quite a lot of time on this, but I think that this is the crucial, because if we do not get the data right, you certainly are not going to get the ratings or the outcomes right. And so we would need to be really rushing with the data, because it's going to take a couple of years anyway to set this kind of a complicated system on place. But then again, it is the Basel, it is, we would need to remember that these are only a couple of pieces of the puzzle. And to talk about sustainable finance and effectiveness and leverage, data, taxonomy, disclosure, due diligence for the companies, Basel requirements on banking, own capital and risk assessment, the same on insurance companies, MiFID and MiFIR when you are really looking the investment products. It is PREEPs, the package investment products, how you explode the risks that are inside in this kind of a complicated market structures, and so on and so on.
So it's
And that was the promise, what they promised to come up, this kind of a total. And it was pretty close to that one when they had this strategy, was it 2 years ago? And now they basically, I'm afraid that they have buried it because the taxonomy has been so difficult. And this is mistake. And this is, I hope, that they would be pushing, and I hope that you could be communicating that now, please do not freeze. Go on with these other elements, and probably they are much easier than these nuclear gas heated debates.
Over to Paul. I mean, clearly there's a suite of financial instruments. You've been obviously critical of the CSRD adoption and so on, Paul, and they all work together. However, we are getting a bit pushback in some areas, understandably. And I guess you've made very clearly the point today that it's a work in progress. No, it's not perfect, but it's in the right direction. I mean, I guess the more we can acknowledge and address the usability, the practicability questions, the more we'll bring industry along with us and bring finance along with us. Right? Is that what you're hearing?
Well, what I'm hearing, that was at least what I'm trying to tell the financial sector as well.
Okay.
Of course, we had a lot of, like I said, we started working. We didn't roll out a blueprint. So one of what I heard many times, also stressed by Sirpa, we need the data, right? We need the data. We need the data, and that is true. But I think we make progress in that area. We still need to make further progress. For example, the CSRD now provide the data for the investee companies, but we also need good access to the data, right? So we now see that market parties scoop up the data, like LSE, Broad, Refinitiv, Bloomberg. I'm not sure that data are always supposed to be private. They have the character of a public good as well. So we need to organize our data, and hope with the single market access point, the data will become more available, because we need to have common data to have this project going forward. What my concern still is also what is also raised by is on methodologies. We now see rating agencies, we have institutional investors, each using their own methodologies, and in this stage that is fine. But I grew up in an academic world when I started working. And there you're very explicit on the methodology used, so that you can criticize the other, and you have a conversation on the methodologies, and that's what we need now also, because it's not enough to have the common data. We also need to have some convergence in methodology, and this is one of the concerns that I still now have, that everyone is doing the work in-house and there's no communication between the houses, so to say, and that we don't make progress in this area. So this is like I said, this is work in progress, So this needs to be put on the agenda so that we can indeed make progress also on methodologies.
And there is an industry association called the Future of Sustainable Data Alliance with the big names, the Refinitives and the Bloombergs and SP that we're a part of, trying to address some of this. But clearly there are some regulatory issues. For example, in energy performance certificates, which is a necessary piece of data we need for the building part of taxonomy, banks can't get access to that in some markets like the Netherlands and so on. So let's just call it it's a bit of a mess that we've got to fix up, but at least the bits and pieces are there, right? So we're making progress.
But it's a bit of a mess. That's true. Like it's a building site, right? You don't expect
it's a building site.
It's a building site. So what do you expect?
And I think that's
we are the construction workers. Not all the listeners are also the construction workers. You're working on a building site. But remember, we always expect, and now I think it was this night that the member states, the ministers for climate and energy agreed on the Fit for 55 package. And this will also help us a great deal to get the sustainable finance really working, because we always, I've sometimes been surprised by the development that impact assessment, ESG assessment has taken. It has been grown exponentially in the last year, which is good. But in the end of the day, I think pricing externalities, I'm an economist by trading, so I can't help that. So you need to price externalities to make the entire system work. So yes, it's a building site, but help is on its way as well, because this will also create the economic incentive to go towards sustainability, and also to have this measurement and the methodologies to have it in the right place. So in that sense, it's work in progress, but we will also have some wind in our back to push us forward as well. Hey, but like I said, I'm a politician, so optimism is in my job description. Right? So that's,
no. I think it's a really good point. And it's when I speak to investors around the world, they're telling me very clearly that thanks to the European Commission's 2030 commitments, not 2050, 2030, and the Biden Climate Summit, now there is no debate about the shape of the future. The shape of the future has been decided. It will be clean and green. It's now a debate about the speed, how quickly we're going to get there. Now, for European companies, that's, of course, an indicator of where business is going to go in the future. And we kind of need to figure out this is a wave to ride, not a wave you're worried about being swapped by. Because if we can ride this wave and take advantage of these now inevitable opportunities because of everyone's changing, we can create wealth and create companies that are viable. But we've got to start thinking for the future, because the past is no guide to this future. This is new.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I must say, I see some asset managers that already do, right? So they don't look at just the corporates, but also in which sector they are. Is this sector? So they have a very forward-looking view on picking their portfolio. And one example I always find striking: the ECB does climate stress testing, right? And it then shows that there are two types of climate risk: the physical risk, like forest fires. These are mainly concentrated in Southern Europe, but there is also the risk of climate change policies. So the prices will change, and this is, to my surprise, very much concentrated among 10% of the European banks. So. And this shows you need to, as an investor, think about which bank is it if you want to invest in banks. So 90% of the banks is probably not very vulnerable to the risk of climate change policy, but 10% is. This is just an example for the banking sector, but it applies to many more of the sectors as well. So you need to identify what is the company that can make the transition and which company that cannot make the transition.
But even all the rest of those banks who've got property assets largely in the books, the property sector is going to change. Buildings that are better thermal capacity, because the heat we're going to start experiencing in Europe, will become more valuable. Or central banks, like in the Netherlands, are going to ban loans to poorly performing buildings, which is going to decrease their value. All these things are coming through. So, and if you're not sorting out your property portfolio, and that's every bank in Europe, then you're kind of missing a trick here. And the taxonomy's guidance, right? It gives us a clue about signposts for the things that are going to work. It's lower risk. These are things less likely to be negatively impacted by policy risk. So Very important. Serpa, you put your hand up. Did you want to jump in? Please go.
Yes, please, about this. And this is the forward looking after the data. One is that we definitely in companies and in regulation, we should have this kind of a backcasting approach. Because what we think that today is enough probably is not going to be tomorrow. Because, for example, textiles are going to exceed the traffic and energy production by 2035 if we do not cut it drastically. And this is only CO2 emissions, not biodiversity. Then, if you look what the forecasts from other sectors, plastics, the same, they are going to skyrocket. So when you make the decisions and ambition level, it's not enough to take a linear forecast, but you need to anticipate this this exponential growth on these sectors and count that in already on that ambition level today. And this needs methodologies, and this needs methodologies also for the financial sector and their calculations and methodologies and on IFRS. And I think that there's a lot of work to do for the academy for too, that how to anticipate that. Then second one is the cost of non-action. You always see the cost of action, as we know, and the cost of non-action is term that actually emerged after the horrible tsunami, and we had the whole Senai agreement after that, and what you know, that you need to make visible why you need to take precautionary actions. But there it was left, and on the natural catastrophes. And actually, we are going to have a financial tsunami if we do not act enough. And we would need here the tools. And that's why it should be compulsory in all EU legislation, national legislation, on the future forecast plans in companies and credit ratings to have the cost of non-action embedded. What about then if the 2030 comes and we actually haven't decreased our emissions? And there I come to my third point, and this is the triple materiality. And this is something that I hope that the financial sector could think very carefully. You know very well what is the first level of the materiality. The climate change is going to burn your forests or flood your cellars. But what and then we actually managed with the parliament to get the double materiality on the disclosure plus on the taxonomy principles. So you need to take into account what is the impact for the society, even though there's not the direct linkage, let's say the biodiversity loss in Indonesia to your activities in Finland. And this is a bit hard for the USA. But maybe we could find this kind of a common language with triple materiality. And that means, very simply put, you are either part of the problem or the part of the solution. So if we are going to make tenfold costs within roughly 10 years from the climate change, if the planet is close inhabitable, no one's business is going to be profitable. It's existential risk to all types, not only humans but businesses. So either what you do today is contributing on destroying your business after 10 or 15 years, or it is contributing trying to avoid it. And this is the transitional plans, and this is that kind of a methodology that we should put place on IFRS, on these ratings, and on our plans. So please come ahead with ideas on this.
And Paul, these are businesses in transition, right? Transitioning towards contributing more. At the Serpa said a good, useful word, anticipation. And we had a question in the sidebar from Tom Vandenberger, which is we still want people to have affordable homes. If we anticipate these changes, we can plan, and there shouldn't be any extra costs because it's all in the planning, right? Is that a reasonable comment? Same with transition companies?
Yeah, true. And but I think I was I think the name was Tom van den Berg, right? Made of course a valid point. It's about people and planet. And if we want to do the transition, we need to have a keen eye to make sure that people can also make this transition. Of course, generally, I would say it. Like I said, I started with saying it's about profit, people, and planet. And we also need to extend the taxonomy to include social considerations and governance. Because personally, I also do a lot of work on taxation, and especially on tax avoidance. There are good examples out there. I see more and more multinationals adopting the GRI templates. I think that should be part of the G. So in that sense, extended, but I think it's a crucial part of our to make people should also be able to make the transition, and that's true for buildings, affordable homes. But then again, we are also helped by the Fit for 55 package, because now currently what you see is that most of the burden of energy taxation or other forms to internalize externalities are put on households, and much less so on corporates, and much less so on agriculture. And it has to do that corporates are usually seen to be more mobile than households, so national politics chooses to let the burden fall on households. I think that will change over time once we have a European approach, and also once we have a climate club, right? The carbon border adjustment mechanisms also is an open invitation to join the climate club, and that will also change in that sense. I'm hopeful to also change the burden of adjustment, and shouldn't be put on people, always put on people.
We need to wrap up. I've just realised about time, sure. Which is we have a good conversation. I need just a final word. What's your view now, where we are today, bringing the financial sector along, which is the Nordic Banking Association's membership base, if you like, including thinking about incentivizing and that extra step, because it's not all going to be done with regulation, right? We've got to bring a suite of solutions to bear. What are your thoughts about that from where we are today? Sirpa.
Well, I would start knowing that I don't have half an hour left very quickly. Let's have very tight cooperation. Let's try to hang and depend on each another. Well, basically, we know that Houston, we do have a problem that is life-threatening. And we know that none of us can solve it alone. And so I'm just very thankful to my and other negotiation teams in the parliament, because I think that this is something what we created in parliament, understanding that this is not the place to have a nitty-gritty between political parties, who's right and who's wrong and what to do. But this is the bigger issue than us, and we better find what we can agree and what we can do and how to do it, and to try to create Pareto optimum. And there's a lot of learning what we in politics can do from your expertise and knowledge. And so the academia, the NGOs, the especially financial sector, I've learned a lot, and that they are really progressive. I usually joke that when I was a kid, I thought that the radical organization to change the world is Greenpeace. Now I think it is a finance sector. So there's a lot of potential on understanding the incentivizing mechanisms. And hopefully you can learn a bit from us what are the challenges and what are the limits and possibilities. And we are all in this together, and hopefully we can continue working all in together as well.
Paul, thank you, Sirpa. Paul.
Well, let me just, if you have the time, also just subscribe to the words of Sirpa. We're all in this together. So if you have good ideas on how to make this house that we are building firm and beautiful, please let us know. Send them to Sirpa or me, because in my experience, the European Parliament is still the most progressive place to push this forward. Thank you.
Folks, you've heard about the fact that we're in the middle of a building site for a new Europe, a building site for an economy and a society that is fit for the future we want to create, as distinct from fit for the past that we're trying to leave. As great as it was at the time, we now need to do something differently. There is a suite of measures involved in European sustainable finance legislation action that Paul and Sirpa have been so critical in the development or the adoption of. The taxonomy is the biggest hit since the Beatles. There's no doubt about it. We've seen taxonomy adoption around the world as a result of Europe's measures here. It is about a green corner. Everyone wants to be on the green corner, which is a win. But it is challenging. We've got work to do. We do need your help. We need advice on all of these measures. But I did like that idea, the new force for radical change, the finance sector. And I think when it comes to institutional investors, there's a lot to be said for that, driving the change, because of course it's our institutional investors who've got the 30 and 40-year fiduciary responsibility to make sure they pay surplus pension when she finally retires in 2045. They need to make sure their assets and liabilities match. They have to wrestle with climate change. They have to make sure we have a society that is productive, sustainable, and wealthy. So thank you there. But above all, thank you, Paul Tang. Thank you, Sirpa Pitikainen, for the work you've done, the work you are doing for leading this. And I'm going to say good luck on the next stage, because as you say, there's a lot more still to be done. Thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Sean. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, bye.